Okay, this is a meeting of the Devens Jurisdiction Framework Committee. Today is April 9th, 2025. My name is Victor Normand. I will be calling the meeting to order, but first I'd like to announce that Susan Mary Redinger, who is the chair of the Harvard Select Board, will be taking the place of Rich Maori. Okay, the roll call. Janice Livingston, Robert Pontbriand.
Here.
Susan Mary Redinger, Dan Nason.
Here.
Brian Sawyer.
Here.
Logan Breeze.
Here.
Brian Hildebrand.
Here.
Bill Marshall.
Here.
Neil Angus.
Here.
Jim Geller.
Here.
Odile Smith. Ryan McDivitt. Kristen Cullen. We have a majority. We are in order. We have minutes from our meeting of March 15th. Are there any comments? Jim?
Several. One, could my name be spelled ER as opposed to AR?
Apologies, yep.
Okay. Second is on the second paragraph under old business. I think the word great should be replaced with grant.
Yep.
And then two paragraphs later, I'm not sure that we got that right. I should let Neil speak for himself. It says, Neil Angus stated that he does not disagree with John Catter. And I thought that you did, but you should speak for yourself on that.
Thank you. What paragraphs are, and I guess said,
1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph down under old business.
another
Another
old
page.
business, oh, sorry.
If memory
I
serves.
think I did say, I don't disagree with them, but
Yeah.
housing is a component.
Okay.
So I think maybe if we just correct it that way.
Yep. Got it.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Neil, is there a second?
Second.
Logan? All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Without objection, the minutes are approved unanimously,
Abstain, wasn't there?
with Dan abstaining. Stakeholder updates, Town of Air.
Mr. Chair, no update at this time.
Okay, Town of Harvard, I'll report the Harvard Devens Jurisdiction Committee met on March 17th. We reviewed financial information that we received from Mass Development, particular balance sheet, which showed a healthy cash balance. We discussed the housing working group was discussed at the meeting. We also discussed documents that we got from the assessors indicating that the total valuation of real estate at Devens was over $900 million, and that was as of January 1st, 2024. So we're approaching the $1 billion assessed value. We also discussed the $300,000 one-stop grant for growth, and that's it. Dan, do you have anything else that you want to add?
No.
Devens related, okay. Town of Shirley. Devens,
Nothing to add.
okay, and Enterprise Commission,
Nothing that's not already on the agenda.
okay, good. Okay, the next item on the agenda under old business is the DJFC Working Group update on the RFP. We did meet and we've done a lot of work on this, and the final edits to the working document were completed either yesterday afternoon or earlier today, Neil?
Earlier today.
Earlier today. So what I'd like to do with the committee's indulgence is to put off this discussion of the draft RFP until our next meeting. And in the meantime, everyone will get a copy of the draft. And I think it's a very good document. And I hope it contains all the elements, and I hope that everyone will give it a good review and we'll have a good discussion at our next meeting. Okay, the next item is the Healy-Driscoll Housing Economic Bill Working Group update. Who'd like to, Brian or Neil?
I'll toss Neil in the fire for
Okay.
last time he did an
Again?
excellent job, so I can just play off that.
Sure, so very briefly, the committee met on, earlier this month in April. What was the date? April
It was either first or second
I
of
think it
last
was
week.
first.
1st. Keep thinking, was it April Fool's Day? Yeah, it was. We basically went through a draft outline of the report that the committee had put together, that the captains of each of the 3 working groups had put together, and essentially laid out 4 key areas, which is kind of, gave a little bit of background on Devens and the surrounding communities, the process for building consensus, the community considerations that were noted in the feedback and the comments that we've gotten on the website. The state is posting all this information on a website, and people can, view this document, this draft report, comment on it. There was 4 key strategies, I should say, that were talked about for strategies for increasing housing. One, obviously, looking at amending the zoning to allow for housing as an allowable use in that district, in addition to the existing allowable uses. So not just changing the zoning just to allow residential, because there are existing businesses within that district. So, working together with those businesses and developing in coordination with the businesses that are there, as well as recognizing the historic character of the district. The second was really looking at what the neighborhood could be developed as, and looking at kind of making it like a village center as it was, originally intended by the military. This area was set up to be like a village center district for Devens, so kind of capitalizing on that design. Number 3, drafting an actual zoning amendment that would facilitate the types of housing and that village type cluster that we would be looking to create. And then number 4 would be obviously the zoning amendment and super town meeting. So that's it in a nutshell. As I said, the draft report is available on the website. We encourage everybody and anybody to provide comments, written feedback. You can submit your comments online at that state website.
Okay, I have a question. I went to the website. Can you actually see public comment? I see with a section
that's
for submitting them, but
It's something we've asked to declare them to clarify if they will be able to show who has commented and what those comments are.
okay.
The working group has been circulated the comments that were received to date as of the April 1st meeting. There was three comments, but I don't know that they've posted them up, and I'll follow up on
Okay.
it.
Okay. Brian, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sure. So I basically presented the discussions I had with a bunch of people from Shirley who live there and what their thoughts are on this. And as usual, most people are unaware of things like that. I think the main concerns that were expressed to me basically was that they didn't want the Avalon apartment complexes up there. And as I said at that meeting, it's pretty fair. It's a pretty fair thing to be kind of afraid of, in essence, but for the most part, it was a very interesting meeting. It's fast and furious. It's an hour long. It's being professionally run. I think there is already a predetermined result at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, it's honestly the opportunity for everybody who cares and wants to get involved and potentially have a voice in what happens to Devon is just to get involved and leave comments and things like that.
Sure.
But it's quite interesting. And then lastly, they tossed out the little kernel of this could be passed either one of 2 ways, either the super town meeting or through the legislator as well. So I don't know if that was a new thing they came up with, or if they're testing the waters to see if there was any potential easier path A or path B, or option one, and if something fails, option two. So,
Right.
very interesting.
So actually, I attended the meeting and represented Harvard. Susan Mary was away on vacation, and I concur with the assessment that Brian has. Is that if you take the document itself and you take away all the background information and the process information, you end up with a series of aspirations that I think are very reasonable, and I think any community faced with a large housing development would have similar concerns about traffic and the aesthetics and the mix of housing and so on. And as Brian mentioned, the one thing that struck me that I spoke to at the meeting was that at least 3 times in the document, the 2 ways in which somebody construed an amendment may be enacted is by super town meeting or an act of the legislature. And in addition to the 3 times it was mentioned in the document, Chris Clutchman said at the meeting, let me be clear, she said, there are 2 paths to amending the zoning, and one is super town meeting and one is the legislature. And I personally take exception to that going before the legislature is never contemplated in Chapter 498. I mean, the legislature could abolish the town of Air if it so choose. I mean, it's a powerful group, only constrained by the state constitution. So introduce that, as Brian kind of hinted at, it just tells me, is this preordained? Is that where they're really headed if they don't get, they meaning the Mass Development and the Department of Housing, if they don't get what they expect, is that what they're going to pursue? And I think that would be a big mistake. And it would be a path to perhaps denying some of those aspirations. And I think clearly what comes to mind is Vicksburg Square. I mean, the Avalon comment, I think at Vicksburg Square is the potential for becoming that kind of a development. And I think what should happen to Vicksburg Square was expressed at that. I mean, it has been expressed in the past. And this committee came up with an outline of what Vicksburg Square could look like. So if only zoning is passed without any intention of going before a town meeting, it would clear the way for Mass Development to do whatever they want within the confines of the bylaws. So that was my takeaway from the meeting.
I can't speak for the committee, the working group themselves, but what I can say is they're presenting both options that are obviously available. Like you said, the legislature can do anything. I don't think it's the intent to bypass things. It's to go to to follow the super town meeting rule. And you'll see that spelled out in the process of what are the steps to make this happen. And the steps are, prepare a document for super town meeting. So, I wouldn't take exception to the fact that they stated there's 2 potential options, but this is the path that, we're going. They're being realistic, I think.
So it's just my paranoia manifesting itself
I
here.
think.
So, such as it is. Okay, any comments, any questions that anyone has with respect to that report? Okay, moving right along. New business, question 12, voting. Shirley.
Yes, so Shirley currently operates under the traditional town meeting style of government. We have 1 voting precinct. If we were to assume the jurisdiction of the historic boundaries of Devens, basically anyone residing within those boundaries would continue to be eligible voters in the town of Shirley. That would be both, town meeting and any election. The only thing that would kind of require Shirley to make a change is depending on how many, if there just happened to be a change over time in the increase of the population, perhaps we'd have to, under state mandate, whatever regulates how many precincts you have. That might affect that, and we would have to implement those. But other than that, I couldn't think of anything that would be a significant change.
Okay, Town of Harvard, like Air and Shirley, voting, Harvard and the other towns have been managing voting at Devens for those residents who live within the historic town boundaries. There are presently 5,847 registered voters. That includes Harvard and the Harvard portion of Devens. And the trigger that Brian spoke of is 6,200 residents, and then you're required to have 2 precincts. And they can be in a common physical location, so I'm not exactly sure what there is a benefit of shorter lines waiting to get to vote, maybe. I don't know, but that's the law. And there would be, if Harvard resumed jurisdiction, and the second precinct was triggered, then there would be a cost estimated at about $15,000 to $20,000 to purchase the equipment needed to conduct those elections. And then also additional volunteers would be needed to manage that. So other than that, doesn't seem to be any issues. Robert, Town of Air?
Yes, so the town of Air currently has a population of 8,400 people, of which there are 7,400 voters, including the voters living on Devens within Air's historic boundaries. We have 3 precincts for voting. In the event of disposition with the return of the historic boundaries to Air, there would not really be an initial impact on voting. And as Brian mentioned, I think if the voting population began to increase significantly in the future, the town would need to invest in the appropriate voting equipment.
Okay, very good. Devens, Jim?
This would be something new for us. Obviously, we voted for Devens Committee and for the Devens Educational Advisory Committee, but those voting procedures will not withstand muster if we were to become our own town. So obviously we need to have a town clerk, and we need to set up all the voting procedures that you all are so familiar with, but which we currently take advantage of when we go to your towns to vote.
So technically, no one is ever born or dies on Devens, because such actions would be recorded in the 3 towns. So that would change. But also, what in their submission to the matrix, what Devens included were the functions of the town clerk, which would be more of an effort than the three other towns presently engage in. Okay, Neil, status quo.
So currently, as you probably are all aware, under Chapter 498, Section 25 provides the allowance for residents who are in Devens to vote in their underlying jurisdictions in all state, federal, and local and regional elections. We also have a number of homeowners and condo owners associations on Devens. So people, are voting as part of that, if they're part of those organizations. And as well, we currently have the Devens Committee, which is a Devens Citizen Advisory Committee, comprised of 5 people who live in Devens. They're elected biannually at an open public meeting, and they meet with Mass Development on a regular basis to talk about all things Devens. That's what happens now, and that's what would continue if the status quo stayed.
So I know this is really an unfair question for you and the Enterprise Commission and on the voting issue, but whereas the 3 towns and the Devens scenario, voting involves more than just electing officers. It involves things like approving town budgets and overrides and so on. How do you, again, it's an unfair question for somebody from Mass Development should be here to answer that. If going forward there is an interest in maintaining the status quo, would there be more, would the Mass Development look for more involvement on the part of Devens residents in connection with things like the budget for Devens?
Good question for Mass Development.
Right, okay.
I would
just-
say that the Devens Committee is that conduit for direct connection with Mass Development. And, you know, for all things Devens. So if there was concerns or issues about budgetary items, the Devens Committee would be the entity to raise that. And Meg Delorier attends all of their meetings, so they're a direct conduit to Mass Development.
Yeah. Jim, do you have any comments on that? I know that you've,
If something changes, then it's no longer the status quo, so.
okay.
I'm
All
not
right.
trying to be glib there, just status
Okay.
quo is status quo.
All right, are there any comments with respect to the submissions from stakeholders? Okay, I skipped over under old businesses, Mass Development CEO update, and I had no update. No response to our invitation to attend a meeting or join the group.
And I think, Mr. Chair, the RFP was going to be our
Yes.
next touch point in
Yep.
terms of reaching back out. Once we finalize that,
Yep.
there'll be another reach out to Mass Development to engage with them.
Yeah, that sounds like the plan. Okay, the next item is a draft letter to Chris Klutchman. At our last meeting, we discussed, Robert informed the committee that the $300,000 that we thought was going to be used for a use to be, that was determined by this committee. Robert told us that Chris Klutchman, who is her title is Director of Housing at EOHLC, something, but anyway, she's the one she is representing that Department of Housing at the working group. And she informed Robert that money, they insisted that money be directed towards exploring issues of importance to the housing working group. This committee discussed it, and the committee voted that this committee is not, there's not a charge of this committee to vote to deal with housing issues. So I did inform by email, Chris Klutchman of the vote, and that what you have before you now is a letter that the committee asked me to draft on the subject. So any comments on this letter? Any changes? I have to admit, it's not my best work, but
So, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Jim?
I guess I tend to be a little more direct. And so there's a part of me that says, so why wouldn't we provide Chris with the work scope summary that we crafted? Because that speaks to exactly what we want to do with that money. And then she can speak to exactly whether or not that's acceptable or not. I mean, the language here, it's soft, and there's a lot of wiggle room in it, and I could see different people interpreting it different ways. But if we provide her with our work scope, then it's very clear what we want to do with the grant, and she can either say yes or no.
There have been 2 phone calls with Chris Klutchman. The first was with Neil and Robert, and I participated in the second. And with respect to using this money to explore the finances of Devens, Chris Klutchman was very direct. Is that accurate, Neil, Robert?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was not going to be allowed.
Yeah.
So then this letter should be a lot simpler. Thank you very much. Here's your money back.
Okay, that's the point. To be clear, let me just, based on the document, the draft document, this is what they would expect us to use the money for. A school needs assessment, updating assessments of existing buildings to determine adaptive reuse feasibility, traffic and parking study, including transit and transportation demand management initiative, study social service needs of the region, engage the community, consider approaches such as a charrette, and I shiver went up my spine when I heard that charrette thing, to identify opportunities and constituent constraints, utilities, topo, identify effects of additional residential units within the ITC district, and create a plan for addressing through design and permitting. That's what they would expect this committee to manage consultants to do that. And if I can just relate this to the work that was done on the RFP, I mean, we've been working on that for about 10 weeks and finally produced a draft document. And to ask a group of volunteers and overworked civil servants, and I mean that honestly, in addition to all the work you do in your real jobs, to be adding this on top of it and expect volunteers to step forward seems unrealistic. Would anyone challenge that notion?
Mr. Chair, I would say that your paranoia is coming into play again a little bit.
Okay, so how would...
I don't think the intent of what Ms. Clutchman said is for this group to do all of those things. That is the housing working group's outline of things to do. There are items on that list that may fall into similar jurisdictional things that we're talking about, like schools, like a school needs assessment. That is something that comes up every time we talk about disposition. What is going to be the impact of Devens redevelopment on the school age population, on the potential, with the existing school contract with Harvard. So I think the $300,000 is not to do all of those studies. I think it's to look at, is there something in there that has a common denominator with the DJFC and the Housing Working Group, and could there be something we work on together? I think that was the intent.
Well, I have to say, Neil, I think you're reading between the lines. I'm reading here. The working group recommends that Mass Development and the towns engage a planning consultant to undertake the following studies prior to any super town meeting. So, I mean, you may have access.
Not the DJFC. That's Mass Development and the surrounding towns. It's not necessarily this organization or this group.
Well, back to what Jim was saying. I think. Do we want to make it clear that thank you very much, but if that's what you need to use that money for, this is not where you should place it?
Mr. Chair.
Robert?
What if we did the following, and sort of what Jim had mentioned is, if we take your letter and we keep the first paragraph, and then I would argue we'd have to wait till the May meeting, but what I'm getting at is send the letter with the RFP scope that we have. So we're sending the letter. This is what the framework committee was planning to do, would like to do, and then sort of your bottom paragraph here, that this is the path we've embarked on, and we need to know where we stand. So to Jim's point, we send them what we're looking to do, and that way, then let her respond to that.
Okay.
I appreciate you putting this letter together, not knocking the letter, but I'm just saying, at this point, that way, both sides are dealing with the same issue. And if they say no at that point, then we cross that bridge.
Okay. Chris Clutchman has represented that the work of the jurisdiction committee, a grant for the work of this committee could be considered in the future.
That is true.
So I think it doesn't make sense to alienate her,
Right.
because within the department, there are two programs
Yep.
that provide funding. One is a housing choice program, housing choice grant program. The other is a community planning grants program. So maybe what we're proposing is more appropriate for the community grants program.
Right.
Um,
So that's why I think, and we do have some time. What I'm getting at is, I know May will be a big meeting, but what I'm getting at is at the May meeting, everybody will have had the opportunity, as you mentioned earlier, to see the final draft of the RFP, weigh in. We'll have that. The May meeting, we send a much shorter, just a short letter with it. Ms. Kletchman, this is what we were working on, we're looking at. Let them weigh in, and also to the fact that we are interested, because you're correct, she has represented a couple of times about some other potential funding sources, because if we're going to do this project, we're still going to need, funding for it. And if it isn't going to come from the 300,000 on that, then we'll cross that bridge then. And perhaps there is an opportunity outside of the framework group, as I see it, because the framework committee has made it clear that its scope and jurisdiction is on issues of jurisdiction. Perhaps that the towns in the DEC and others on that housing choice grant look at potentially something that would fit in there, rather than sending the money back to go to Plymouth or somewhere else. That's just my take on it. So I would propose that we, for the May meeting, we will have a discussion and hopefully finalization on the scope of the RFP. At that time, we send it to Ms. Kletchman, have her weigh in, and also at that time, as Neil mentioned, with the completion of the RFP, that is our next entree to to mass development, to have them come back to the table.
One of the problems is that the May meeting is intended to produce the final document. And the comment period ends April 21st. In the document now, if we don't clear it up, it's really very specific that a $300,000 grant was made to the town of Air, and it can be used to perform these services. So my fear is that will remain in the document, and there'll be an expectation. Don't forget, this document goes to the legislature. And it goes to, I don't know how many members of the legislature there are. But if you took that number and subtracted 3, you'll get the number of senators and representatives that know almost nothing about Devens. And so you're going to be sending them a document that's going to make a number of representations, including this one. And there'll be an expectation that the towns are going to be involved in these studies, which I don't know how it works, Neil, who would sort through this list to decide what the framework committee does? And I know we have a member of the Harvard School Committee on the Harvard Devens Committee, and she keeps asking the same questions. How many units, what kind of units, and when are you going to produce them? And based on this report, we can't answer any of those questions. So what are we supposed to produce that's meaningful, other than generic responses?
Well, Mr. Chair, there's no mention that I'm aware of the $300,000 in this report. There's mention of the need for additional studies in order to finalize all these things, like the numbers of units, when stuff would go online. We can't plan in a vacuum. We need this additional information in order to finalize this report, or produce a proposal. The idea is not to get all this stuff done by the May 18th deadline. It's to say that we need further study. And again, there's nothing in here that I'm aware of about the $300,000. So I don't think we should worry that this money that this committee has gotten is gonna be taken away, or, it may be taken away, but it's not part of this report.
Well, when they say that Mass General and the towns will engage with a consultant, have they had any communication with the towns to do that? I mean, what?
No, but I'm talking about the $300,000 specifically. I don't think there's fear that, we lose the money. We're gonna lose the money if we don't choose to use it for something that Executive Office Housing and Livable Communities allows us to use it for. So I think Robert's approach is a fair one. Send the RFP, this is what we're working on. Will you reconsider?
Okay.
If not, like you said, there are additional funds available, other programs. Maybe we ask for some suggestions on how, what other programs we might seek additional funding for.
Okay, so how would, in the second, you'd say substitute the second paragraph for the summary scope, the draft summary scope?
Right, so on the draft letter, the first sentence of the first paragraph is fine. Then it would be something enclosed or attached is the RFP, is the scope, is the RFP that, we've been working on. And then for your review, I can put some better language together. Basically, the concept is, Ms. Kletchman, here's what we've been working on. This is what the framework committee would like to proceed with using the 300,000. She'll have the whole thing to look at. And then, as you're saying at the bottom here, we need to know where we stand with respect moving forward.
So the third, you would not include the third paragraph at all?
No, you can keep that.
I mean, in their report, they're
Yeah.
looping in mass development to do these studies.
Yeah.
And I think the only suggestion here is
Yeah.
let mass development is in a better position on all levels. They have the staff, they have the money, they have the experience to manage these studies in an efficient way. Okay.
So three things will happen in May for the framework group. The first one is everybody will have seen, as it's just finished, will have had time to see and weigh in on the final draft of the RFP. So we'll have that done. The second piece at that point, at the May meeting, we make a decision to issue a version of this letter with that attached to Chris Kletchman. In other words, all right, this is what we want to do. You have it now. Please review. Can we proceed or not with the grant? Okay? She's going to say one of two things, either yes or no, I think. The third piece is we'll also have the RFP done in May, and at that meeting, I think coming attraction is to put together from the framework committee with that another letter to mass development about coming back to the table. Because I think the RFP is going to require two things to be successful. It's going to need funding for a consultant, whether it comes from this particular grant or another source, and it's going to need mass development involvement.
Okay, I'm just concerned about, I don't disagree, except I'm concerned about the timing.
And just so I'm clear, concerned about which timing.
Well, the comment period ends in
for the working
April.
group.
yes, April 21st, the comment period ends. So presumably, the working group who are working from the draft document will take the input they received at the last meeting and any comments and produce a final document.
Okay, and so what would you like to be on the record for that? I'm just
Well,
asking for my
yeah,
benefit, I'm not trying to be argumentative.
No, I think that this letter should be sent and included as a public comment. So that gives the working group folks who are drafting the final document a chance to amend the final document and to say mass development will engage, if that's where they're headed, mass development will engage consultants to deal with these issues that have been enumerated. Again, this is going to the legislature. And so the legislature, someone reading this document is going to assume a level of participation by the towns that won't exist. The document keeps referencing consensus, building a consensus.
We're talking about two separate issues, though.
Okay.
One is the housing working group, and one is final disposition of Devens.
Right.
Which we are charged with, right?
Right.
So I don't see what the rush is to get something in for the housing working group when we're talking about overall jurisdiction. This final disposition.
Chris Clutchman expects this group to use that $300,000 to hire consultants to deal with the working group.
This group has already voted
Not to.
do that. So
Yeah.
that's done.
Yeah.
Period.
Does she know that?
Yes.
Yeah,
Victor sent
she
her an
hasn't
email.
responded, but she knows.
Of course she knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She knows.
So I just don't see the
Okay,
The-
no.
the connection between the two, and I think Robert's plan of action makes the most sense.
Okay, I think we're making progress. This is what I sent to Chris Clutchman, March 3rd, on Thursday, March 13th. It's very brief. Chris, the requirement from your office that funds awarded to the Town of Air and the Devens Enterprise Commission on behalf of the Devens Jurisdiction Framework Committee, DJFC, be utilized to support the work of the Devens Housing Group was discussed at length during a regular meeting of the DJFC yesterday. Following the discussion, a motion was made and acted upon. Voted on DJFC March 12, 2025 motion. A motion was made by John Catter and seconded by Janice Livingston to formally communicate to Chris Clutchman that it is not the charge of the Devens Jurisdiction Framework Committee to study solely the issue of housing at Devens. Motion passed by a roll call vote, 7-1. Neil Angus voting no. We hope that your office will reconsider its position to allow these community planning grant funds, $300,000, to be used for the Devens Jurisdiction Framework Committee study as the project application intended. Thank you for meeting with Robert Pontbriand and Neil Angus and me earlier this week. Is that clear enough?
I would say the ball's in her court.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any reluctance to me submitting this as a public comment? So we're on record with the whole committee, not just Chris Clutchman?
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Chair, I mean, that is a public record, so I would have no issue with it.
And then we'll proceed along the lines that you've suggested, Robert, to finalize the RFP
Right.
and communicate that scope in a letter
Yep.
to Chris Clutchman.
Right, so, Mr. Chair, envision for the May agenda, or the May meeting, in addition to whatever other matters, the first order of business will be for the Framework Committee to approve the RFP. And as you mentioned, everybody's going to get it way in advance to review. So that would be approved. Upon that approval, we send that with the letter to Chris Kletchman specifically about the grant funding, and this is what we want to do. And then the ball is in her court again to respond. And then the third piece is we use the RFP, as we've been discussing, as the entree for another letter to the head of mass development about coming back to the table.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, just to be clear, so we do some recrafting of this letter to Chris,
Yeah.
so that she knows what we intend to do,
Yep.
written in such a way that if it's not acceptable at this time, you will consider this for future funding.
Correct.
So we leave that door open,
Yes.
and it's
Or
really,
or suggest
Yeah.
other grant funds.
Yes.
or whatever.
Yeah.
That would be more appropriate.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And to Jim's point, she will know clearly what we want to do with it. The world will know what this committee wants to do with that money,
Correct.
with it, with what we need to do.
Mhm. Yes.
Okay. Brian, what do you think?
I agree. I agree with Robert's approach and, you know, what you just said.
Okay. And I will submit this email as a public comment so that we're on record within the comment period
Mm-hmm.
that this committee is not on board with using using these funds for housing study.
You know, I think it's a good idea to submit it, but I just hope what we send to her is not as in your face, but just nicely massaged but firm, you know, because you never want to tick off anybody who has the money, you know. So,
Well, the way John had phrased his motion,
Yeah.
he said it's not to charge, to use it solely for that purpose.
Yeah.
So, you know, we're not, we're being, I think we're being consistent with that comment.
Mm-hmm.
that part's fine. I'm just saying,
Okay.
like, all together, like, it should not just say you suck, but just, you know, this is kind of what, so, just have nice edges to it, you know?
Okay. Logan, what do you think?
I agree with Robert. I think that's a good way of going forward, and it's, you know, then they have it, they see all the work you all put in on the draft, and, you know, it shows like that we're consistent with what we're trying to get accomplished here, and then obviously in the future it gives good ideas for different grants that might be available that are better suited for us. So can't say we didn't try to work, you know, with them on that aspect.
Right. And they will have had fair notice so that, you know, if those who are working on the program and the report know that okay, the best use is 300,000. Give it to mass development and just let them fulfill the requirements of the grant. I have one other suggestion, that this submission as a public comment also be sent to the two state senators and Dan Cena. They sat in on the first meeting of the working group, and Jamie Eldridge was there at the last meeting. So, and just going back, I wasn't at the meeting where Robert was. I don't know if you were, Neil, where this committee was encouraged to submit a grant application.
Mm-hmm.
And Jamie was there, Dan Cena was. Cronin there?
He was not.
By phone. He was there by phone.
By phone, yeah.
Okay. All right. So they must have some notion as to what this committee was going to do with that money, and by copying them on this, they know that we have plans for it, and they're not what's spelled out in this draft report. We good with that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sounds like a way forward. And then then the letter that, we'll recraft this letter to Chris Kletchman, and we'll put a soft edge on that so that because she indicated to you, Robert, that she went to both secretaries.
She
And
did.
they agreed that 300,000 should not be used to do a financial analysis. So,
Yeah.
you know, we need to make the world aware of what we're up to here.
Okay.
Okay, so I think I'd like to have a vote that we submit this as a public comment. Is anyone willing to make a motion to that effect?
I move to, how do you want me to word this? I move to make the email sent to Ms. Clutchman a public comment for the working group.
Yes, Housing Working Group. Okay, is there a second? Brian? Any other comments on this? Okay, on the motion,
Actually, I do have.
Jim?
So, you know, I think you could simply say that, you know, this committee voted not to use. You go into,
Okay.
a lot of detail that I don't know that it serves any purpose going into that public comment. Do you want to call out that it was a 7-1 vote, that Neil was the sole dissent? Is that really what you want to put into that comment section? I wouldn't, but that's me speaking.
Your concern is for Neil? And Neil's been the odd man out before. This is nothing.
We took a vote. This was the decision of this was the decision of the committee. You know, if
Oh,
you
no,
all
no.
if you all think I'm out of bounds here, that's fine. You can say so. I'm just bringing it up as a, because if it were me crafting it, I would have removed that.
You like it simple and straight and to
Yep.
the point.
Absolutely.
The only problem with that, is there a remote chance that Chris Clutcher may change her mind? That's doubtful.
Probably not if she already talked to the other secretaries. you
Yeah,
know.
she's kind of committed. Okay, now the only,
You want me to amend my
well,
motion?
maybe
summarize?
yeah, I just want to make, so you don't want to send this email, but you want to take a vote on,
Just a slightly edited version of that email. Simplify it a little bit.
or say, substitute a new motion for the motion that's here? Motion that you're proposing is just straightforward. We do not want to use those funds.
The commission voted at
I-
their
I-
X meeting to not utilize the funds.
Yeah, my motion is just simply to simplify the words a little bit. That's all.
What about, I make a motion to provide a summary of the email provided to Ms. Clutchman to the Devens Jurisdiction Working Group.
Okay, so again, this is going as a public comment for consumption by the world. So if we just come out and say we don't use a grant for that, does it raise some questions? So whereas before,
I mean, part of what's difficult here is you're referring to something that you sent to Chris Clutchman without it first being approved by the committee. So I don't know that I have a copy of the thing. At least I don't have it at my fingertips. But I remember reading something somewhere, and it's just I just thought that, you know, that you called out the minutia of the vote, and I didn't, and I just am of the opinion that that's not necessary, and I would have advised to do otherwise.
Okay.
If everybody disagrees, fine, disagree.
Okay.
No skin off my back.
I think regardless, they'll understand the message of the email, and we can read into it, 1,000 different ways, and how everyone will read it differently, but I think that they'll get the point, regardless if you summarize it or provide it as it was given originally. It's not like they can't look back at the minutes and see what happened anyways. It's all public record, so she might provide that to them herself too. So since she's already has that, do you want to change it from what you have? I don't know. If I received that and I was reading it as her, would I read into it negatively? Probably not. Everyone reads it a little differently, but it's what the group feels is necessary.
Okay.
You could also just say it has majority vote and keep your name out of it too.
I'm not worried about my name or my vote. I voted the way I voted. I'm not concerned about that. I don't see the big deal in terms of getting this in front of the housing working group. The point's been made to Chris Clutchman. What's the housing working group going to do with it? I just don't see the relevance. So I don't think it's important either way.
And I think as a matter of practicality, with this before them, it's just a matter of recrafting a bit some of the statements made in the plan. The plan identifies mass development towns working, hire consultants. They may just strike out mass development in the towns and just say consultants will be hired to do this work. That's a way for them to deal with this without doing violence to the intent of the report.
It is, but again, there's no mention of the $300,000 granted to the DJFC in this document, so I don't see the connection.
But the towns would be involved, regardless. The towns doesn't necessarily mean the DGFC.
Yeah, and I mean, if that's Harvard's position, then Harvard can make that comment, I think, in the report. I don't know that I don't know if there's consensus. We need to take a vote to see if there is consensus through this committee, but.
Okay. Chris Clutchman did say at the last meeting that there was a $300,000 grant that was made to the town of Air to be used for this purpose.
She did say
She did say that.
if the DJFC does not want to use the funds, that they can find some other use for it, and it could be something towards jurisdiction, towards the housing study. But there's nothing in this document that talks about that grant or those
I
monies.
read most of that today as well. I didn't see anything.
Yeah.
Maybe, where did I read that there are funds available, $300,000 funds available? In the minutes of their meeting, maybe? I don't know. Okay, so we have a motion on the table to send this email as a public comment to the working group with copies to the senators and the rep.
Is there a requirement that we send that, considering it's a public document?
I'm sorry, I don't get it. What?
Do we have to submit it?
Well, or if, only if you want it to be in the public comment section of, because what the committee did, when they sent around the draft, they also included copies of the public comments.
Yeah.
So it's a way to, for the rest of the world to know how this committee feels.
Well, when I step back and think about it, I don't see the true benefit to submitting it, even though I did second it, but after some more discussion, I don't see the true benefit. I only see the potential of some unintended consequences of sending that, but that's just me.
I guess, based on more conversation, being that she already receives it, she'll probably share it with them anyways. We probably don't have to resend it to them. I guess I'll move to resend my motion.
Okay. Okay, Jim, did you want to formalize your thoughts and
No.
form of a motion?
Nope, I withdraw my amendment.
Okay. So we do nothing? Leave things stand the way they are?
Yes.
Okay.
I think one way.
I don't think we're doing nothing. I think we're following up on Robert's suggestion, and that will, I think, still all be done before the report is finalized anyways. When's our next meeting?
Second Wednesday.
May,
I want to say the 18th, 14th or the 18th.
Second Wednesday, the 14th. So a few days before the report's finalized.
Well, the 14th, the committee will present the final report. And then they meet again on the 18th to vote to send it to the legislature.
I don't recall the actual
That's- yeah.
dates. Sorry.
In this report, they indicate that there are 5 meetings, and so in order to get the 5th meeting, they schedule a meeting after the final report is prepared.
Correct, we've already had 3, so the next one's 4th,
Yep.
and that's in May, right? May 8th or something?
First week of May, yes.
Okay, so so we're essentially what we're doing is the letter to Chris Clutchman is being held in advance. We'll do some
The RFP is complete.
okay. All right. Okay, next item, just to inform the stakeholders that question 13, municipal finance and budgeting, is the submission required for the permanent government meeting. Okay, any public comment at this time? Anybody? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we've had some robust discussion today, as we similarly had last month, and I am somewhat dismayed that we are revisiting that which was discussed and voted on last month. Just to remind this group that the agreement with the vote was that Robert was to provide a draft of the motion to the chair, for the chair to draft a document to be distributed to the members of the DJFC for review and comment prior to finalizing it and sending a letter to the EOHLC chair. In retrospect, that did not happen. Instead, the chair, as presented in the documentation, sent an email directly to the chair of the EOHLC with no review or comment by the full body that had voted on the motion last month. And that email contained comments and solicitation of the chair that was not endorsed by this body last month. I find that inappropriate for a group of this constitution to allow behavior like that to operate outside the bounds of the open meeting law. Subsequent to that, we're back relitigating that which the group already discussed last month, indicating that at the end of the day, the money was going to be released to the housing working group for the housing related efforts for which that grant, although it was submitted under the DJFC, it had been rewritten last year, again, without the review, approval, or the vote of the full body of the DJFC. And we are now trying to once again solicit the reconstruction and the reallocation of the money for a DJFC effort that I believe the EOHLC chair has made clear is not considered appropriate. More than half of this meeting has been spent on going forward with discussion about what was discussed last month, was voted on last month, and yet we take the dips and sways outside the boundaries of the open meeting law, and we are back here again relitigating this. I don't know why we would continue to do that. It is clear that the money with the grant that was submitted, that was rewritten in July of last year, was for housing. And this group last month specifically discussed releasing that money to the housing working group since it was fundamentally not part of this DJFC charter. That's my comment. I hope that we find some clarity to go forward and not cover old territory. And I don't know what you intend to seriously get out of this by sending correspondence, soliciting the EOHLC chair once again, and copying our legislators. I think it makes this body's position compromised, at least in my view, for those who are paying attention to what is happening. Our primary focus is for jurisdiction. There are a lot of ways that we can get our inputs into housing through the housing working group and other, and that's exactly what this body agreed to last month. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, we've reached the end. I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Jim, second.
Second.
All right, Robert, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. Without objection, we are adjourned.